Nigeria, former military head of state General Ibrahim Babangida, IBB, has confessed that Igbos were killed all over Nigeria before the civil war. Ibrahim Badamasi. Babangida's book has sparked debates, particularly regarding the annulment of the June 12, 1993 election. However, it also discusses crucial historical events, including the prelude to the Nigerian Civil War. The book highlights that Igbos were not safe in Nigeria before the Civil War, facing widespread killings across the country, especially in northern Nigeria. General Yakubu Gowon, Nigeria's head of state at the time, released Obafemi Awolowo from prison to gain Yoruba support, while failing to protect Igbos as promised. The worst mass killings of Igbos occurred on September 29, 1966, across northern Nigeria, leading to a massive refugee crisis as eastern Nigerians fled home for safety. Ghana's leader, General Joseph Ankara, facilitated peace talks between Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu and the Nigerian federal government in January 1967 in Aburi, Ghana. The Eastern Nigerian delegation claimed the agreement favored a new Nigerian federation, while the federal government insisted it was within a united Nigeria's framework. Unlike the Eastern region, which published its account of the Aburi Accord, the federal government never released its own version, raising suspicions about its stance. Some critics argue that the killings and persecution of Igbos did not end after the Civil War. Instead, Igbos continues to face oppression and violence in Nigeria today. The continued marginalization and violence against Igbos fuel arguments for Nigeria's division, with Biafra seen as the only true safe haven for Igbos. Many key figures involved in Nigeria's turbulent history, including those who once fought or overthrew each other, are now celebrating IBB's legacy, showing Nigeria's ability to move beyond past conflicts despite unresolved ethnic tensions. I want to tell you a story that I have been thinking about a lot lately, a story that takes us deep into Nigeria's past and makes us feel both sorrow and anger as we remember the hardships and tragedies that many endured. It is a story I discovered in a book written by General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, a former military head of state of Nigeria, whose revelations have sparked heated debates and long overdue discussions about the true history of our nation. I must confess that while I have never been an admirer of General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, reading his account forced me to confront some hard truths about Nigeria's past and about the treatment of one of our nation's most resilient peoples, the Igbo people. The book not only reopens old wounds by reminding us of the tragic events that occurred long before the Nigerian Civil War, but it also challenges the way we have come to understand and interpret those events over the decades. I remember sitting in a quiet corner of my living room one late afternoon, the light of the setting sun casting long shadows across the pages of this book. I was struck by the raw honesty of the narrative. In it, General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida reveals that long before the bitter conflict known as the Nigerian Civil War, there were mass killings of Igbo people all over Nigeria, a fact that had been swept under the rug by many historians and politicians alike. According to his account, the Igbo people were not safe in any part of Nigeria, and particularly not in the northern regions. The realization that so many innocent lives were lost, that countless families were torn apart by violence, left me with a heavy heart and a mind filled with questions about justice, accountability, and the true meaning of national unity. I began to reflect on the events described in the book, thinking back to a time when our country was a mosaic of diverse peoples and cultures, yet also a place where deep-seated rivalries and political manipulations often turned neighbors into enemies. In that era, Nigeria was a country in turmoil, where power struggles and ethnic tensions festered under the surface. The book recounts how General Yakubu Gowon, who was Nigeria's head of state at the time, took a dramatic step by releasing the prominent nationalist leader Obafemi Awolowo from prison. This move, it seems, was designed to win the support of the Yoruba people, a strategic decision that, while perhaps politically expedient for General Yakubu Gowon, came at a terrible cost. The Igbo people, who were equally part of the fabric of our nation, were left unprotected. Their cries for help were ignored as the state's promises of safety rang hollow in the face of relentless violence. It was on a fateful day in late September 1966 that the worst of the atrocities unfolded. The book details how, on September 29, 1966, mass killings of Igbo people erupted across northern Nigeria. I can hardly imagine the horror of that day, a day when communities were shattered, when families were forced to flee their ancestral lands, and when the very notion of safety and home was brutally undermined. The violence was so extreme that it led to an overwhelming refugee crisis. Eastern Nigerians, many of whom were Igbo, had no choice but to abandon their homes in search of safety. I found myself feeling a deep sense of loss as I pictured the fear and confusion that must have gripped those who suddenly found themselves on the run, with nowhere to turn and no one to trust. As I turned the pages of General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida's book, I was also introduced to a series of events that, while seemingly disconnected at first, painted a picture of a country on the brink of a devastating civil war. One such event was the peace initiative that took place in Aburi, a town in Ghana, during the early days of 1967. At that time, General Joseph Ankara, who had by then become the head of state of Ghana, played the role of a mediator by inviting representatives from both sides of the conflict to come together in a bid to broker peace. The Eastern Nigerian delegation, led by figures who had witnessed firsthand the brutality of the mass killings, came to Aburi with a heavy heart and a desperate hope that a new, more equitable federation could be forged, a federation that would guarantee their safety and respect their rights as citizens. On the other hand, the Nigerian federal government maintained that any agreement reached in Aburi was simply an extension of the vision of a united Nigeria. The stark differences in these accounts, and the fact that the federal government never published its own version of the discussions that took place, left me with a lingering sense of injustice. It was as if the truth had been deliberately obscured, leaving future generations to grapple with a history that was as much a mystery as it was a tragedy. What makes this story even more heartbreaking is that, according to the book, the oppression and violence that targeted the Igbo people did not simply end with the cessation of large-scale hostilities in the Civil War. Instead, many argue that the marginalization and brutality have continued into the present day. There are those who believe that even now, the Igbo people face systemic discrimination and are often the targets of policies that do little to protect their rights and dignity. This ongoing strife has fueled calls for a re-examination of Nigeria's structure, with some even arguing that the creation of a separate state, Biafra, might be the only true way to ensure the safety and prosperity of the Igbo people. I could not help but feel a deep sense of empathy for the millions of people who, over the decades, have lived with the scars of historical violence. The idea that a people could be so repeatedly neglected and harmed by their own government is not only disheartening, but also speaks volumes about the complexities and failures of nation-building in our country. While reading the book, I was also struck by the irony of how former adversaries and political figures who once played key roles in the events that led to these tragedies now found themselves in positions where they were celebrating the legacy of General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida. It was almost as if time had blurred the lines between friend and foe, and the bitter history that once divided the nation was slowly being replaced by a shared nostalgia for a past that, despite its many horrors, had also shaped the modern Nigeria we know today. I thought of General Yakubu Gowon, who, despite his controversial decisions, was once hailed as a hero by many. I recalled the story of how he released Obafemi Awolowo from prison, a move intended to secure the support of one ethnic group while leaving another to suffer. And then there was General Joseph Ankara, whose intervention in the Aburi peace talks was seen as a last-ditch effort to prevent further bloodshed. Even as I considered these actions, I could not ignore the stark reality that many Igbo people were forced to pay the ultimate price for the political games being played behind closed doors. I found myself drawn into the narrative even more when I read the personal reflections of the speaker in the transcript of a YouTube video discussing the book. The speaker's words, filled with a mix of anger, disbelief, and sorrow, resonated deeply with me. He spoke about how the book laid bare the fact that before the Civil War, there was no safe haven for the Igbo people anywhere in Nigeria. He recalled the grim details of how, in the northern parts of Nigeria, entire communities were decimated, with people being beheaded and their severed heads displayed as a grim reminder of the power struggles that were unfolding. He described the terror that must have gripped the hearts of those who witnessed these atrocities, and how that fear eventually forced them to leave behind everything they had ever known. As I listened to his account, I could almost feel the palpable tension and desperation that permeated those troubled times. It made me wonder about the countless untold stories of loss and survival, of families torn apart and dreams shattered in the blink of an eye. The speaker went on to discuss the events leading up to the infamous peace conference in Aburi, Ghana. He explained that at a time when the nation was in the grip of chaos, the intervention of General Joseph Ankara was seen as a beacon of hope. The talks in Aburi, which took place over the course of a couple of days in early January 1967, were intended to bring an end to the violence and to set the stage for a new chapter in Nigeria's history. However, the accounts of what was agreed upon at Aburi differed sharply between the Eastern Nigerian delegation and the representatives of the Nigerian federal government. The Eastern Nigerians claimed that the discussions resulted in an agreement for a new federation that would ensure justice and safety for all, particularly for the Igbo people. Meanwhile, the federal government maintained that the talks merely reinforced the idea of a united Nigeria, with no special provisions made for any ethnic group. The fact that the federal government chose not to publish its own version of the meeting only deepened the mystery and left many of us wondering about the true nature of the promises that were made or broken that day in Aburi. As I delved deeper into the book, I realized that this narrative was not merely a historical account. It was a call to remember and to confront a past that has long been sanitized by official narratives. The speaker's voice in the transcript was filled with indignation as he recalled that the promise of safety made to the Igbo people by the Nigerian government was never fulfilled. He recounted how, in the aftermath of the tragic events of September 29, 1966, the Igbo people found themselves in an ever-deepening crisis, a crisis that forced many to leave their ancestral homes and seek refuge elsewhere. Even after the Nigerian Civil War, the echoes of that violence continued to reverberate across the nation. The realization that the lives of the Igbo people were not secure in any part of Nigeria, not even in their own homeland, was a stark reminder of how deeply divided our country had become. I could not help but feel a sense of profound sorrow for a people who, despite their rich culture and resilient spirit, had been subjected to repeated cycles of violence and neglect. There is a part of the book where the speaker, with a tone that was both reflective and impassioned, questioned the ability of Nigeria to ever truly come together as one nation. He wondered aloud why, even after all these years, the federal government had never taken the opportunity to publicly share its version of the events that transpired during the Aburi Peace Conference. He argued that if the Nigerian government were truly committed to transparency and reconciliation, it would have published a detailed account of the meeting, a document that could serve as a bridge between the past and the present. Instead, the silence from the federal government only added to the growing mistrust among the people, particularly among the Igbo, who felt that their suffering had been conveniently erased from the national memory.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining me in this video. How many of you have seen this IBB book that is trending? There have been misreaction and a lot of controversies in that book, especially what he wrote concerning the annulment of Abiola's election of June 12th. So a lot of people disagree with him totally about that. But there are a lot of things he wrote in that book. I am not a fan of IBB and I can never be one. But there is something I read in the book. By the way, if you don't have the book or you have not, gotten your soft copy of the book, write me on WhatsApp. I'll send the book to you. Okay. I believe the purpose of the book is not to make profit. So the book is just to let people know what transpired in Nigeria and why Nigeria is irredeemable. Okay. If you read IBB's book, you will know Nigeria is irredeemable. Okay. Just try to read the book. Despite their still challenges of what he wrote, people are saying some of the things he wrote is not true. Okay. Now, there is a place I really want us to look into in this video, and that is where he said that before the Civil War, Igbos are not safe in Nigeria. That led to Ojukwu, asking the Igbos not to mingle with everything they are doing in Nigeria, and that led to, after they remove Karen Nkrumah, the new leader of Ghana, now chooses a neutral ground in Aburi, and the federal government of Nigeria did not publish the Aburi's meeting. They went, but the eastern region, led by Ojukwu then, in that meeting, published their own part of the meeting. And, at the end, they did not agree. Ojukwu did not, not Ojukwu, Gowon did not implement the Aburi's accord or Aburi's meeting, the business they transacted there, which led to Ojukwu declaring the state of Biafra because Igbos were not safe in Nigeria any longer. And the Nigerian state were the aggressor. They went into war fighting the Biafrans. So you can see this on page 63. Okay, you can see this on page 63. Started from page 62 down to 63, 64. But for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to read page 63 for you and we analyze that. Okay, now look at your screen very well. But Gowon went further in a move that turned out to be a political masterstroke. In August, he released the leader of the Yorubas, Chief Obafemi Awolowo, from Calabar prison, where he was serving a prison sentence for treason, and secured in the process the much needed support of the Yorubas at the time. Unfortunately, Gowon's commitments to the Igbos that their lives were safe in northern Nigeria were unfulfilled. Now, so that you will not be lost in the video. Before now, by the way, if I send you the book, you will read it, you will understand more about it. He was talking about the issue of Obafemi Awolowo, who was sentenced to life imprisonment because of treasonable charges, okay, in Calabar prison. And that was the reason why in Zogon, that coup they called Igbo coup, he still wrote it in this book, okay? IBB wrote it in this book, that the coup was never ethnic motivated. By the way, Nzogo, he is not an Igbo man, according to IBB, because he was born and brought up in Kaduna. He speaks Hausa, he don't speak Igbo, okay? So, and the motivation of the coup was to release Yoruba man, the Yoruba leader Obafemi Awolowo. That was what Gowon wrote. And I can't just imagine how someone like Reno Mokere would be very shameful to, the history he wrote on Facebook saying the Igbo coups every day trying to bring ethnic, clashes in Nigeria. Now, to this, let me continue from where I stop, okay? Now, after the Gowon released Obafemi Awolowo, okay? He released it so that he will gain the Yorubas, support to fight the Igbos before he went into the war. Now, he promised Igbos that their life will be safe in northern Nigeria. He was unable to do that. Igbos were being killed. Go and read what happened. Pogrom. That people were being beheaded, put their heads in the train going to the south. Go and read about it, okay? Now, Let me continue. So unfortunately, Gowon's commitments to Igbos that their lives were safe in the northern Nigeria were unfulfilled, almost simultaneously with the deliberation of the leaders of thought taking place in Lagos. Perhaps the most horrific killing of Igbos occurred in different parts of northern Nigeria on September 29, 1966. The killing were frightening. Okay, mark the words. A deluge of refugees swamped eastern Nigeria from practically all over Nigeria. So Igbos were returning homes as refuge because they were being killed all over Nigeria. Faced with this intolerable situation, Ojukwu understandably barred the Eastern Nigeria delegation from further attending Gowon's peace and reconciliation talks in Lagos, insisting that the lives of Igbos outside Eastern Nigeria were unsafe. Okay, now out of the book. Okay, before, the lives of the Eastern Nigerians are not safe. The lives of Igbos are not safe outside Eastern Nigeria, but today their lives are not even safe in their homeland. So it's an indication that the worst things has been happening more than the way it was before. Okay, now let me continue with the book. Say the country was locked in a national stalemate until Lieutenant General Joseph Otto Ankara, who had become Ghana's head of state after overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah, stepped in by suggesting a neutral and safe venue for an actual reconciliation conference between Ojukwu and the federal government. That intervention, seen as a last chance to prevent all-out war, led to the famous peace conference in the southern regional town of Ghana, Aburi, between January 4 and 5, 1967. That conference between the Eastern Nigerian delegation led by Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu and the federal delegation led by Lieutenant Colonel Gowon resulted in the famous Aburi Accord. In the absence of fully published records from the federal government regarding what transpired at Aburi meeting, the details of what happened have remained speculative. While the published accounts of the Eastern Nigeria delegation insisted that an agreement for a loose Nigerian federation was agreed to, the federal government claimed that the agreement reached was understood and seen within the framework of a united Nigerian state. Alright, let me stop here. You now understand what the man, IBB meant. That the lives of Igbos were not safe before the whole issue that led to the war. And after the Aburi Accord, the question I'm asking up to today is that why is it that the federal government of Nigeria, they were unable to publish their own account? Their own, you went for a meeting, you should be able to publish and tell your citizens this was the business transacted in the meeting. This was the minutes of the meeting. So they didn't bring it out. But Ojukwu with Eastern region published their own and said this was what we transacted. I think if Ojukwu was wrong, the federal government should be able to come out to publish their own. The reason why I'm saying this is that up to today, the lives of Igbos in Nigeria, they are not safe anymore. No matter how many years lies could, fly, one day the truth will always come out to outshine the lies. For over the years, Nigerian government have paid people simultaneously to make sure they paint Igbos like the causes of what they have been through in Nigeria. The likes of them are Reno mockery. They write so many things to confuse generations that are coming because history are not being taught in school anymore. But I can tell you categorically clear that the history we know is enough. We know everything that transpired. So, despite people are contending with the lies in the book of IBB, there are still so many parts of the book that you can rely on to understand what really transpired. Igbos were being killed all over the Nigeria before the Civil War. So it wasn't a matter of Civil War. The question now is, why is it that Igbos were being killed all over the country? That will lead you to the issue of hatred. These people are educated. These people are civilized. They go to everywhere. They do business. They dominate. That was the issue that led to the killing of Igbos. And up to now, when we come out to tell you that there is a need for us to divide this country, people will say, no, what did you know? What did you do this? Why? Because someone like IBB gathered them and served them oil blocks. If you talk, they tell you to keep quiet, you don't know anything. Because they have the oil blocks. Because of oil blocks, your people are dying, your people are no longer safe in their ancestral home. Ojukwu declared the state of Biafra because it is only Biafra land that the Igbos are safe. But now, there is nowhere they are safe. All around the country, including the ancestral home, they are being burned, they are being chased out, they are being killed. Look at what happened in the Ebonyi state recently. So it's insane, and we must come to understanding that Nigeria can never work.
Fascinating. Many of the key figures in this book and who shaped the history of our country are here with us today. And that tells another story all by itself. And that is something truly unique about Nigeria. Our ability to move beyond the past, no matter how bitter and no matter how adversarial our past relationships may have been, and to still come together. So seated amongst us here today is General Yakubu Gowon, who became Nigeria's head of state at the age of 32 and led the country for 9 years. His government was overthrown in 1975 by a coup involving the then Brigadier Olusegun Obasanjo and the then Brigadier Theophilus Danjuma, and the author himself, I confirm, the then Lieutenant Colonel Babangida, who was then commander of the newly formed Armored Corps. Also involved in that coup were the then Lieutenant Colonels Muhammadu Buhari, Lieutenant Colonel Sani Bello, who is here also, and Lieutenant Colonel Sani Sami. Yet here we are today with former President Obasanjo, General Danjuma, and of course the author himself present, not as adversaries of the author, but as witnesses to history, celebrating a fellow statesman. In a striking turn of fate, the author notes that it was President Obasanjo who, after the tragic assassination of General Murtala Mohammed, insisted that a young Lieutenant Colonel Babangida be appointed to the Supreme Military Council, making him its youngest member at the time. Also represented here is the immediate past president, Muhammadu Buhari, another leader whose path intertwined with Babangida. It was former President Babangida who played a key role in the coup that brought President Buhari to power in 1983, and later in another coup that removed him and brought Babangida himself into power. Yet today, President Buhari is represented at this occasion, celebrating the man who overthrew him and detained him for 3.5 years, his one-time old adversary, former President Babangida. And then, of course, there's a gentleman here who was an elected senator in 1992 in the course of Babangida's transition program. When Babangida annulled the 1993 election and General Abacha took over and dissolved the Senate, that senator tried to reconstitute the Senate in resistance to the dissolution. He was detained, charged to court. He escaped into exile. Today, he is also here to celebrate with his former tormentors. But as President, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. The third reason why this 420-page book is important is because it unveils one of the most enigmatic.
This is the end of our news update. Please click the icon on the top right corner of your screen to watch my next video. You will enjoy it. I will see you again in my next update. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye for now.